Hi, my name is Amelia Vogel, and this is my inquiry project on the realities of poverty in children's literature. So as an overview, poverty is defined as when people lack the resources to fulfill their needs. This can be, for example, not having enough food to eat, enough money to pay rent, etc. By the end of 2022, it's estimated that 860 million people will be living on less than $1.90 a day. And since the pandemic, this number went up like crazy, a huge spike in poverty levels, and there isn't any sign of it slowing down anytime soon. It's not often that truthful and realistic information about this topic is told to the public, and especially not to children. This is because it's very taboo to talk about. But I think that exposing kids to hard topics like this will help decrease that taboo and help that go away so that we can get help to the people who need it. And I chose this topic because it's one that I have never seen represented in children's books before doing this project. It's very serious and relevant to today's world, especially post-COVID, and it's something that I'm sure I unknowingly grew up surrounded by. So the first book that I read was Tia Isa Wants a Car by Meg Medina and illustrated by Claudio Muñez. So this book told the story of a little girl who was an immigrant living with her aunt and uncle, or her tia and tio as they're referred to it in the book. Her tia Isa wants to buy a car so that they can go to the beach, but cannot afford it when she has to continuously send money home to their family. So the main character decides that she will help her and finds ways to make money by helping her friends. At the end of the book, she has made enough money to help Tia Isa, and they go to buy a car together to drive to the beach. So these characters aren't living in extreme poverty. They have an apartment. They're comfortable. Her tia and tio both have jobs, and she goes to school. But it's clear that they don't have a lot to spare. It's really small. Her tio works a manual labor job, and her parents, the main character's parents, live back home with her sick abuelito. I think this story teaches kids about saving for things that they want and knowing the importance of prioritizing needs and helping others. So my highlighted quote for this book is, "Sometimes it's hard to wait for good things to happen." And then a question I would pose alongside this is, when is a time that you had to have a lot of patience, but it all paid off in the end? And for the reading activity, I came up with this one. I think that this book's lesson about allocating funds and saving could translate really well into like a game setting where kids would have to make decisions on what are needs versus wants and spend their money accordingly. So each child would get small cards with different things written on them. Each kid would get a different combination of cards, and they would each have corresponding costs. For example, groceries are $20, gas is $15, a new toy is $12, bills $30, going to the movies $10, etc. So they'll each get 100 fake dollars to spend on their items, but all of the cards will come up to be more than 100 combined. So they'll have to sort their cards into needs versus wants and learn how to allocate their funds in a smart way. So they'll have to think about how they can spend their money and what things they might have to sacrifice. This is the second book I read, Tight Times. I am going to skip it for the sake of this presentation, but it was a really good book. I especially like the illustrations personally, and it had a lot of good insight. So the third book that I read is called A Place to Stay, A Shelter Story, written by Erin Gunty and illustrated by Esteli Meza. And this book is about a mother and daughter who are staying at a homeless shelter for the first time. The little girl is reluctant at first, but her mother makes every effort to make the change exciting. She uses her daughter's imagination to make the shelter a castle, the bed a rocket ship, the dining hall a banquet hall, and the playroom a treasure cave. In the end, the duo are happy to be in a comfortable bed and grateful for the shelter. And I really loved this story. I thought that the illustrations especially were fantastical, which went along with the imaginary aspect of the story. I was always interested to see what the mother would come up with to entertain her daughter and her imagination. And then at the end, it was really cute because the daughter was actually the one using her imagination and creating these fantasies. I think that this story draws back to the topic because it teaches a little bit about homeless shelters, and it portrays the narrative that every corner turned has potential to be an exciting new adventure. So the highlighted quote I got for this story is, "I don't want to stay here," I told Mama, looking up at the tall building. "I know," Mama said softly, "but we're very lucky to have a place to stay." And the question I would pose with this is, when is a time that you had to do something you weren't very excited about, but you were grateful you weren't stuck in a worse situation? So, and then for this reading activity, I would have kids tell me about any times that they've had to move houses or gone to a new place, and we would talk about if they were worried about being in a new place and if they liked it or not. And then we would also talk about homeless shelters and exactly what they do to help the community. I would challenge my students to go through their closets, toys, and other things to find what they don't need or want anymore and bring it into school for me to donate to a homeless shelter. I would then reward every child with something fun, regardless of how much they brought in to donate. And this draws back to that article that we read this week about how fundraisers and field trips and how public school isn't really free. So the final book I'm going to be discussing in this presentation is A Shelter in Our Car by Monica Gunning and illustrated by Elaine Pedlar. So this story is about a little girl and her mom, similar to the last story, who are currently living out of their car. They're immigrants from Jamaica and often talk about the beaches back home. And we see how they live in their car, how they get ready for school and work, and how the mother works and also has to go to school. The main character talks about how she wishes she could have an apartment, warm water, more food to eat, and how she gets bullied in school. At the end, the mom has found a steady job and their future looks bright. And I think this book was really, really, really great. It did a really amazing job describing a very realistic story of a single mom and daughter who are just trying to get by. It doesn't shy away from the hard concepts posed in the story, like class-centered bullying, shame, and death. The main character's father has passed away somewhat recently, and their grief isn't ignored or muffled. I really love this story, and I think out of all the ones that I read, this is my favorite. And then the highlighted quote from this book is, "Living in a car isn't the best thing in the world, but at least I've had Mama loving me and taking care of me." And I would ask, have you ever had to look on the bright side? And did doing this make you feel better? And then we're going to skip this reading activity and the next book. However, this book was really great too. I think all of the books that I highlighted in this project are really great tools. And then for our author spotlight, we're doing Monica Gunning, who wrote A Shelter in Our Car that I just discussed. Monica Gunning is a teacher, author, and poet who was born in Jamaica and moved to New York when she was 18. Her stories concern life in the Caribbean as well as the immigrant experience in America. This background adds to the authenticity of her most famous book, A Shelter in Our Car, because she grew up in Jamaica. So when the mother and child were dreaming about the beaches back in Jamaica, it was probably Gunning recalling her own childhood. And then those are some of her other famous works. And then the illustrated spotlight is Maya Cristina Gonzalez, and she worked on My Very Own Room, which I skipped over in this presentation, but it's a really great book and the illustrations are really amazing. So she is a queer POC illustrator, activist, author, and educator. Her art style is very unique and specific to her. I found it very Kahlo-like, and it avoids a lot of stereotypes, which is something that she talked about for a while on her website that I researched from. And she has started her own publishing company that uses holistic, nature-based, and anti-oppression frameworks in their books and materials for kids and grown-ups. And then those are some of her other works. She has illustrated and also written, and with her publishing company, she's published a lot of her own books. And then there's my works cited. So thank you.